Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to answer the question, monofilament versus fluorocarbon versus braid. Which is the best? I'm going to elaborate more, but the answer is yes. The answer is all three. Or you could ask me the question on this particular combo right here. What kind of line do I have on it? Monofilament, fluorocarbon, or braid? And the answer is yes. So let me explain that. Well, actually, I will get back to that in a second. Let me just talk quickly about the different kinds of line. Monofilament is the line that your grandpa used, that your dad used. It's the cheap line now. When you go to the store and you buy just a cheap line, it's probably monofilament. It's the line when you buy a rod and reel combo and it comes with the line spooled on it, ready to go, it's monofilament. Monofilament has been around forever. It's cheap to make, cheap to produce. Benefits of monofilament. It's cheap. It stretches. Okay. The benefit is that it's cheap. All the rest of these points are neither negative or positive. They're just characteristics of the line. It has a lot of stretch. Okay. Before it breaks, it has a lot of stretch. It's easy to tie knots in it because of how stretchy it is. It floats. Okay, monofilament does not sink unless it's weighted. So it floats on top of the water. You can generally get it in multiple colors, but when you just get clear monofilament, it is fairly clear. It's not invisible, but it's fairly clear. Fluorocarbon. What is fluorocarbon? Very similar to monofilament, but at the same time, it has some noticeable differences. One big thing is that you're going to notice it's more expensive to produce. It's made differently. We're not going to get into all that today, but fluorocarbon, the big two things that separate it from monofilament, well, three things. It doesn't have as much stretch. It has some, but not as much stretch. It sinks in the water, it does not float. And it's more invisible than monofilament is. So you get a line diameter equally of monofilament and fluorocarbon, put them under the water, and fluorocarbon is going to be more invisible. It's going to be harder to see. Okay. Braid. Another way of producing a line, also expensive, like fluorocarbon. What are the characteristics of braid? Much stronger. Okay, you can get the same test strength with a much smaller diameter. So a 50-pound test line of braid could be the same diameter as maybe a 16-pound test line of fluorocarbon or monofilament. So you don't have to get a really thick, heavy-looking line to get the same strength. So if you want to get maximum strength and still have a diameter line that's thin, go with braid. Braid has no stretch at all. It's basically like a little cable or a little rope. Okay, there is no stretch. Braid also floats on water. Braid is not invisible. In fact, it's more visible than fluorocarbon or even monofilament. So the answer, which is the best? In reality, it depends what you're doing. Okay, so you just have to ask yourself, for the application that I'm going to be doing it for, the fish species I'm going for, the place I'm fishing, whether it's a shallow stream or river or whether it's a deep lake, the color of the water, whatever, the type of fishing that I'm doing, whether it's top water, whether it's mid-depth, whether you're fishing in really deep water. You just have to ask yourself, what am I going to be using it for? Then make a decision. Do you want a line that sinks? Or do you want a line that floats? Do you want a line that has stretch? Or do you want a line that has a little stretch? Or do you want a line that has no stretch? Do you want your line to be almost invisible or not? It really just depends on yourself and what you want to do with it, okay? If you're fishing down deep, probably go with fluorocarbon. Why would you want braid for that The fluorocarbon is invisible, okay? So, you don't really want your fish seeing a gigantic line coming down all the way to the lure. It just seems less natural. So if I know my purpose is going to be, like if this rod and reel right here, I know I'm going to be using this to fish on the bottom. I know I'm going to have something on the bottom, whether it's a jig or a plastic worm, or if I'm going to be fishing in deep water with whatever. I know I'm fishing down deep or, on the bottom. I'm probably going to go with fluorocarbon. It's perfect for that. It's invisible. Doesn't have a lot of stretch. I don't really want a lot of stretch. It's just perfect for that. Also, fluorocarbon naturally sinks. So, yeah, you're going to have a weight on there. No matter what line you pick, it's going to sink. It's going to go to the bottom. But why not take away as much resistance as possible? So, fluorocarbon is just perfect for underwater. It's naturally going to sink. It's naturally going to be invisible. That's perfect for underwater. What if I'm fishing topwater? It's not really as important, but traditional monofilament would be just fine. Monofilament floats, which you're fishing topwater. There's no reason you would not want it to not float. So when you're fishing topwater, it's a little different. You're not just waiting to feel something and then you pull the line, or maybe feel something heavy or feel a hit or a bite. You're usually visually watching your lure on top of the water, and as soon as there's any kind of movement or any kind of splash, you assume it's a fish and you jerk the line really quick. Well, that maybe sometimes you jerk it too quick. You don't let the fish totally get it in their mouth. So having a little bit of stretch on topwater might be good. It might have a slight delay to help you get that fish in. You say, well, what would braid be good for? Well, just naturally, braid is stronger, okay? Now, you could get the same strength test line in all kinds of line, but if I want super strong fluorocarbon or monofilament, I'm probably going to have to go to 30, 40 pound test line. You know how thick that's going to be? It's just going to be like a rope. It's going to be so thick. It's going to be hard to cast. Fish are going to see it easier, especially monofilament. It's easy to see. It's just not ideal. You're not going to like it. It's just not going to fish well. It's too thick. It's too big. But I can get that same 30 to 40 test line in a really small diameter of braid. So if I'm looking for a stout line, let's say I'm fishing in thick grass, or I'm fishing around a lot of cover, around a lot of lily pads, or I know that once I hook that fish, there's a good chance it's going to get wrapped up in a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to have to jerk it out. Or if I get hung up, I'm going to have to jerk it out of the cover that I'm fishing in. You want that super strong line, go with braid, because you're going to get the same strength with a much smaller diameter. So just in general, that's the three types of lines, and that's their strengths. So why did I say I have all three on this one? Let me explain. So the reason I have three kinds of lines on one setup is because I have monofilament as my base, I have braid as my main line, and I have fluorocarbon as a leader. I'll get back to that in a second. Let me say, obviously, if you're watching this, you don't need to do that. Okay? You can put just straight braid and just use it straight braid. It's fine. You can have straight monofilament like we've been doing for 100 years. You can have straight fluorocarbon. You don't need to have a different line tied to a different line. It's not necessary. But it can be ideal for certain situations. So, for instance, if I'm fishing a yum dinger, okay, or a hellgrammite or something like that, throw it out there, I let it sink to the bottom. The yum dinger sinks really slowly. I'm watching the line. A lot of times, especially if something is suspending and slowly floating, you literally might not even feel the bite of that fish. Because in order to feel that, you're going to have to take all the slack out of your line, which is immediately pulling your lure towards you a little bit. And it's not going to be as natural. You want it to look natural to the fish, right? So you might have slack in your line. The lure might be falling or it might be on the bottom. You don't want a ton of slack, but you want a little bit of slack to keep it there. But while that's happening, that fish could come up, put it in its mouth, start to swim away, and it might be a full second before you even realize what's happening, if not longer. We all know this. If you're in clear water, sometimes you see a fish grab your lure, and what do you know? You didn't feel a thing. So, in my opinion, the best line to use is a fluorescent line, okay? I personally don't know of any colored fluorocarbon lines. They're usually just clear. Like I said, they're invisible. But monofilament and braid you can get in any color. So I'm probably going to want a colored line of some kind for that type of fishing, because it can be very hard to see a clear line, and you need to see your line where it goes into the water. And you can tell what looks natural. Yeah, that when you throw your lure in there, it starts to sink. Your line's moving because your lure's going down, but you can tell when it speeds up a little bit, or it gets all the way to the bottom and then it starts to go again. You can tell that's a fish. That doesn't happen. And a lot of times you felt nothing, but you set your hook right at that moment, bam, got a nice fish. But it's hard to see that sometimes, especially in different conditions, whatever the case. So it can be tough. So a colored line is perfect for that, so you can see what you're looking at. I think braid has the best colors. So this is a fluorescent yellow line. It is braid. Okay, it's very thin line, even though it's 10-pound test line. This particular setup is just a rod that I take when I go wade fishing in the creeks. So I'm not looking to catch a monster or nothing, but you're getting a really thin, really stout line, and that's my main line, okay? So I want to be able to see the line, and I think braid, the colors on braid and that are just the easiest to see. But I'm getting the benefits of braid. There's no stretch. I have a lot more strength to the line. So it's awesome. It's perfect. But I don't really want that bright fluorescent line to go all the way to my bait, because if I can see it, the fish can see it. So the last 6 foot is a leader. I literally tie fluorocarbon as a leader to the end of my braid. And so the fish don't see my main line that I'm looking at up on top. They're not seeing anything because that 6 foot of fluorocarbon leader is invisible to them. And once again, it sinks. It's just naturally perfect for that application. If it's really deep water, the fish might see something, some kind of line way up toward the top, but in the 6 feet prior to the lure on the ground or on the bottom of the water, the bottom, they're not going to see it. So it's perfect. So you say, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, but where is monofilament coming into play? Well, my base is monofilament. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to do that. But so if you have ever tied on braid straight to the reel, you've done nothing, you've just got a brand new reel, or an empty reel that has no line on it, and you tie a little knot on there and you start to try to wind it up, it's not going to happen. It's so slippery. That braid is just slippery, and it will just spin. It will never grab hold and actually spool up. And if you manage to, and I've done this on a baitcaster, if you manage to actually somehow get it to hold on there and get it to moving where it'll actually maybe grab itself and have a little friction and actually spool up, it has no drag. You can fill that whole spool up, and because there's no stretch and it doesn't tighten down on itself, it will never grab hold of that spool, and it will literally, the whole spool of line will just spin on your reel. You can cast it but there is no drag. As soon as a fish starts pulling, there's no drag. You're gonna have to grab the line. So there's ways to combat this. One would be, a lot of people, if they're gonna put braid directly on a spool, will get some tape. Get you some black electrical tape, literally put that tape on the spool, and then tie your line on there, and it will have something to grab, and the braid will grab that black tape. Now, sometimes it still wants to slip, but if you do it right, that'll work. So why do I put a base of monofilament? Well, one, it's cheap. I'm sure you've got it laying around. I got tons of it laying around, so just grab some cheap monofilament. And you might even put the black tape on anyway, but put your monofilament on there first. At the very least, you can just, spool it on there, get it started to a point where it's completely covered. And then using a uni knot, you can Google that, you can watch a YouTube video about it, tie that line to your main line, and then keep reeling, of course. And then as that braid comes on the line, it hooks itself to that monofilament, which is giving it a good base, and you have no issues. Or you could also maybe even fill the spool halfway up with monofilament. You say, well, why would you do that? Well, once again, it's cheap, and the fluorocarbon and the braid specifically are pretty expensive. So maybe you don't want to just empty your entire new spool that you've bought of braid and put it on just one reel. Maybe you want to put it on a few different reels. Or maybe you have multiple people that are wanting to use it. You could literally fill your spool halfway up with cheap monofilament that's going to give you a good base, and then fill the second half of the way up with the braid that you're actually using, the braid you actually want. In my case, I don't do that. I just reel it up enough to give it a good base. So I have a base of cheap monofilament on there, just something the braid can hook to. And then the braid is my main line, and it goes all the way to the end. But in this case, I have fluorocarbon as a 6-foot leader because it's perfect for the application of fishing on the bottom or fishing in that situation. So this is perfect. I can see the bright fluorescent braid, but yet down closer to the lure, the fish cannot see the invisible, the invisible fluorocarbon. Big difference. Big difference. Now, you could do this with anything. You could put a monofilament leader on there if you wanted to. And it could be more than 6 foot. It could be 12 foot, 18 foot. You could think, I like the braid as my main line, but maybe I do want if I'm fishing topwater, maybe I do want a monofilament leader on there, just to give it a little bit of stretch, because I do want that stretch for the type of fishing I'm doing, that I'm doing, the application. There's a million ways you could do that. Okay, a lot of people will put a heavy leader on. Maybe, there are steel leaders, but maybe you're fishing for something that's got teeth like pike, and you want to put a real heavy 2 or 3 foot leader on just to have that last bit to be super stout line, and the pike's teeth are not going to bite it. Or maybe you want a light leader that's not as stout as your main line because you're afraid you're going to get hung up, and if you have to break the line, you're willing to lose your lure, but you don't want to have your entire line, ripped off and hanging over a tree in the water or something. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no right or wrong answer. But putting all three types is a great way to do it. Now, for your base, like I said, you could just use black tape and you could put braid straight on there. But I would never use braid or fluorocarbon as a base because it's too expensive. So use your cheap monofilament as a base, and then go with your main line, and then if you want to have a leader, have a leader. You don't always have to do that. Say you're fishing a frog around lily pads and real thick moss, and you thinking that you're going to get hung up a lot, or you're going to have to rip fish out of places. Have your base, but then just have braid. Don't worry about a leader. Or maybe the type of fishing you're doing, Like maybe you're in a boat, you're in a lake, and you're fishing a spoon 50 feet down, and it's all about feel, and you don't care about what your line looks like as it goes into the water, then don't worry about having a color. Just have a straight fluorocarbon, whatever the case. So this just opens a can of worms, and this is there's an infinite number of possibilities that you could go with. But this particular setup, I have all three. I have monofilament line, braided line, and fluorocarbon line, all in this one setup. By the way, it works pretty good. So just think about that. It's something to play with. It's something just, to get the ideal situation with your line to meet every need you might have and every benefit you want to achieve, and just to maybe take you to the next level. So hopefully this has been interesting to you. If you have any recommendations on types of line or leaders or how to rig it up, please tell me in the comments. I'd be very interested to know. But anyway, until the next time, take care.